Welcome to the Purveyor Zone. My name is Lionel Melendi, certified master tobacconist, cigar connoisseur, and purveyor of fine cigars and smoking accessories. Today is October 21st, 2019, so sit back, pour yourself a libation, light up your favorite cigar, relax, and prepare to experience life's earthly pleasures from around the world with the Cigar Purveyor. Wow, today is a special day. Thank you for joining me on my podcast today, and I have a very special guest here with me today, my father, Lionel Melendi. Thank you for having me here and being on this podcast, Dad.
Thank you very much, son.
Well, this is great. It's been like 51 years in the making, to actually be able to interview my father. But this is great because there's a lot of things that we'll talk about. There's a lot of experience that my dad has had in the industry. So let's get right into it. So, Dad, tell our audience, how long have you been in the premium cigar business?
Well, in the premium cigar business, I will say about since 1960, 61, 62.
Okay, so that's quite a number of years you've been in the industry. So you were, our family goes way back in the tobacco industry, starting with farming and then manufacturing, and then I take it you were the first Melendi to get into the retail side of things. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your first experiences with tobacco. Just so we get an idea and some understanding of how you got into the business.
Well, my father's, his parents came from the northern part of Spain, from Barcelona and Asturias. And they went over to Havana, Cuba, and he started the business there as manufacturing and growing tobacco. And my dad was born in Havana, Cuba, Jose Melendi, in 1901. And he went into the cigar business, and he learned the trade in the Hoyo de Monterrey and the Monte Cristo, the Benjamin Menendez that manufactured H. Upmann cigars, and a few other very famous brands. So when he was 21, he was born in 1901. When he was 21, he had a lot of experience, but he wanted to come to America. So he came to America at the age of 21, and he got a job in a chinchal. A chinchal is a small factory, handmade. And my other grandfather, my mother's father, had a chinchal is a little cigar factory with 4 or 5 cigar makers on Brooklyn Heights. So when my dad came to this country in 1922, 23, I believe, he got a job in my grandfather's factory, Antonio Flores, and his brand was on Flores. The very, very good cigar. It was made out of all Cuban tobacco, the wrapper, the binder, and the filler. And he was there for quite a while. And he decided he wanted to go on his own. So he opened up a little cigar factory in Manhattan. No, excuse me, it was on Sand Street in Brooklyn Heights. And from there, he was there a few years, and he moved to New York City, to Manhattan, on Water Street, which is downtown Manhattan. And he started growing. It was all handmade cigars, all what they called, at that time, clear Havana. Wrapper, binder, and filler was all Cuban tobacco.
So yeah, I was going to ask you, so back then, there were no restrictions on tobacco from Cuba, so was it all Cuban basically, or did they use tobacco from other countries?
Oh, mostly, if it was all Cuban tobacco, they called it clear Havana. That was everything 100% Cuban. But there was other blends. There was cigars made in Jamaica, which made very good cigars, and that was sometimes blended with other parts of the country, cigars in Jamaica and other region, but not too much in the other Caribbean island countries. There's very, very small amounts at that time.
Right. Wow, that's incredible. That's awesome. So it was clear Havana was like today we would call a 100% cigar from one region, like a Puros.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
back then they called it a clear Havana.
A clear Havana if it was all 100% Havana tobaccos.
100% Havana tobaccos. Wow. So please, this is awesome. The stories and everything.
And then the embargo came. Well, there's a lot of things in between, but at that time, in the late 20s, early 30s, at that time it was the height of cigars. It was over at that time more than 1 year. They had a record year, the cigar industry. Now I'm talking about all tobacco products, no homogenized binder, or the sizes, or no cigarillos. It was 6 billion cigars a year, and
wow,
it was accepted. And it was accepted all over. There was no restriction where you can smoke. You can smoke on the subway. You can smoke on the planes, outside, indoors. No restriction where you can smoke.
So you can smoke back then in your office, in a restaurant, on the subway, on planes. I mean, there were no. It didn't matter where you smoked.
No, not at all.
That's incredible. That's incredible. As you know, today. You're lucky enough to be able to smoke in your home, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, anywhere out there. I mean, even parks and stuff. You know, you have problems smoking. You know, they have bans at the beach, at the parks. Forget restaurants, and there are very, very few cigar places. So, no, that's incredible. So yeah. So tell us when was the first time that you were introduced into the world of cigars? When was your first cigar?
My first cigar, I went to public school in Brooklyn Heights, and in the 8th grade, I have an identical twin brother. Our dad, since he was in the cigar business, he gave us some cigars to smoke, and we enjoyed it and all that. So we were smoking the cigars in the schoolyard, in public school, done by 8.
So wait. So back then, in 8th grade in public school, you could smoke a cigar on the schoolyard and there'd be no consequences.
No, there was. Let me correct you on that. There was a consequence. The principal came over to the schoolyard and he said, "What are you doing?" So I said, "We're smoking cigars." He says, "You can't smoke cigars on school grounds." And I says, "Well, you know, our dad is a manufacturer, so he gave us a cigar. He doesn't mind we smoke." He says, "Well, you and your brother can't smoke cigars on school property." I said, "Okay." And that was my first experience in smoking a cigar, and I enjoyed it.
Do you remember what cigar that was?
No, it was my father's, I assume, since he was a cigar manufacturer at that time. So I assume it was a Jose Melendi brand cigar.
Right. And speaking of Jose Melendi, I'm going to show our... here, I got a couple of things here. So this is my grandfather's blend here, Jose Melendi. Do you remember anything about this blend?
It was, at that time, it was all handmade, all clear Havana. And he knew how to make cigars, and the blends and all that. He was really, not because he was my dad, but he was a super expert in cigar making and
now, isn't it true? I mean, I remember the stories from when I was little. He used to tell us some stories about how he would be able to, his palate was so good that he would be able to smoke a cigar and tell you the region where these tobaccos came from.
That's very true. He had a palate that was unbelievable, and with all what farm it came from and the district, the region in Pinar del Rio, because it's in Pinar del Rio or in any country, you can grow tobacco on one side of the road, and on the other side of the road it can be entirely different. And he can tell more or less the region, and sometimes he can tell you the plantation where that tobacco was grown. Wow,
that's an incredible palate. I wish I had that palate. It must have skipped me. But that's great. That's great. And he had the factory. So he had a factory in Kingston, New York, at one time. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, that's when he mechanized. cigar making. A little cigar factory up in Kingston, New York, with about 6 machines.
Okay, so he started putting together some mechanized or machine cigars.
Yes.
Up in Kingston.
But clear Havana.
But clear Havana. Okay. So that's very interesting. And also going back, I know from the stories from the past that, whenever we got together in holidays and you would tell some of these stories, Grandpa, or my grandfather, Jose Melendi, he was involved in some groundbreaking work in the tobacco industry, in the premium cigar business. One of those stories is work he did in Nigeria, and that led to the Cameroon wrapper, and the other one was some work down in Nicaragua. I guess in the 50s and the 60s this happened. Can you explain a little bit about those?
Yes,
those
after the Cuban embargo and the restrictions they put on tobacco coming from Cuba, that was all finished. The cigar factories were nationalized. The plantation, all the businesses, the owners were, their property and factories and places of business, even the little retail shops were nationalized. So then in 1961, I believe, the Rockefeller Foundation wanted to send a team of 3 experts to Nigeria. One was an expert in marketing, and that was Bob Wood, which at the end was used to import all the Cuban tobacco cigars from Cuba. And they needed an expert in cigar manufacturing. And they needed a gentleman that was Miguel Saludes, that was an expert in growing tobacco in Cuba. So the team of 3 went to Nigeria in 1961, and they were there for about 3 months, examining the tobaccos and making cigars on a small basis. And they decided while they were there, they go to Nigeria. They were in Nigeria in a place called Ibadan. So then it wasn't that much feasible to grow the tobacco there, but they were near Cameroon, and they wrote a report on it. Most of the report was done on Nigeria, and it wasn't that feasible. But in the Cameroon, they grew excellent tobacco, and that's what the Cameroon came. That famous
the famous wrapper from
Cameroon, which is one of the world's best. At that time, in the later years, that a pound of Cameroon wrapper was going as high as $50 a pound.
Wow, $50 a pound for tobacco.
Yes.
Wow, that's and Cameroon wrapper is a very sought after wrapper. It's something that a lot of people enjoy. It has that natural sweetness, which is pretty nice in there. So so Grandpa was involved in that whole thing with right after the Cuban embargo and getting Cameroon, report from Nigeria, and then deciding that it was better to grow the tobacco in Cameroon.
That is correct.
Wow, that's an incredible story. And then there was another story with Grandpa being down in Nicaragua during the time of General Somoza, who ruled that country. Is that correct?
Yes. General Somoza wanted my father to go down because he wanted to see. He wanted to grow tobacco and manufacture cigars in Nicaragua. So my dad and mother went down to Nicaragua for about 3 or 4 months in Esteli, and my father founded the first cigar factory in Esteli, and it was very, very successful. And then after he was there, they had a cabinet meeting with Somoza and his cabinet, the agriculture secretary, the bankers, and all that. And they decided they wanted to set up a regular full-size cigar factory. But Somoza wanted my father to run the factory, finance the factory, and my dad asked General Somoza what he was going to contribute. So he says, well, I get 50% of the business. So my father said, you want me to do the financing, manufacture the cigars, and you get half? He says, well, that's the way it is down here. And my father said, my dad said, no thanks.
And he lived to tell about it.
And he lived to tell about it.
Wow, I remember that story. You used to tell that all the time around Thanksgiving, and that's a funny story. But it just goes to show, why it's important, that these stories get out there. I mean, I knew these stories from when I was a little kid and all, and it always fascinated me. Actually, I remember, just to backtrack for a second, I don't know if you remember, but I remember, because I remember my first cigar. And I remember I was in the Boy Scouts, and you were a chaperone on a camping trip. I think we were up at summer camp up in Camp Alamucci. I don't know if you remember.
Oh yeah,
Camp
sure,
Alamucci.
absolutely.
So we were up there, and I remember one night we were going through I think I was about like 13 years old, and I remember your staple cigar was, if I remember correctly, it was a Partagas Sabroso in the metal tube.
Yes, that is correct.
And so you were smoking a cigar as we were hiking through the trail at night, and I was looking at you smoking the cigar, and I said, hey, Dad, can I try? He said, oh, you want to try the cigar? And I said, yeah. I go, okay. So you gave me the cigar. You told me to take a deep breath, bring all the smoke down into my lungs, and let it settle there. So I did that, and it was not a very enjoyable experience. Needless to say, I didn't touch a cigar again until I think I was 18. So if that was what you were after, it worked, But I remember that. I don't know if you remember, but I remember that, because I think you remember things when they're the first time. But anyway, no, those stories are great. So getting back to, I want to talk a little bit about your years in the retail side of the business. So tell us a little bit about the company that you started, or actually started working there, and then you purchased it. But you could tell a little bit about Della Concha and how that came about, and how that all transpired.
Well, after my dad sold the business in 1961, 62, he sold it to J.B. Back, and I went to work for Herman Lane at Lane Limited, which was a tobacco, pipe tobacco manufacturer, and he's also was involved in manufacturing pipes in London. One of the famous ones in the world was the Sheraton, which was an excellent pipe. He had excellent pipe tobacco. So I was with him, and my territory was Manhattan, the 5 boroughs of New York City, and some on Long Island, New York. And I did that for about 2 years. And I got to say, Herman Lane was a tough boss, but with me, he was very fair. And when I told him I wanted to go on to business on my own, he says, Lionel, whatever I can do for you, I'll help you out. So I was walking, and walking on, one of my accounts was Della Concha, Robert Della Concha. He was from Venezuela, and he sent his daughter to school up in upstate New York. And he used to come at me once or twice. So some people talked to him about opening up a cigar retail store on 57th Street and 6th Avenue. So he did it more like a hobby. And he put in one line of cigars, which was his own brand, Della Concha, and he had a Flormere chocolate franchise on the other side. And I used to, the excellent location, but it was very limited. The manager of the store was an attorney that came, was an immigrant from Cuba. He lost everything. Everything was nationalized that he owned. And it just didn't match and he was losing money left and right. So I got a letter from Venezuela. My wife said, you got a letter from Venezuela? So I opened it up, and it was Della Concha. He wrote me a letter that the business was very bad, and he wanted to see if I could line up a buyer when he came to New York City. But it was difficult selling a place of business which is losing money the first 2 years. And he had a couple of buyers, but they wanted the business for nothing. So he says, "Why don't you run the business? And I'll give you 25% of the business." But I was young at the time. I was about 62, and I accepted. But I made one of the biggest mistakes I made in my life. I shook hands, because when I was my dad, I used to meet all these manufacturers and growers from Cuba, like Benjamin Menendez and Pepe Garcia, or Puerto Torrano, Nestor Plasencia, and all the big ones. And they did business on handshakes, lots of money. And that's the way I thought. So we shook hands on the deal.
Right.
And I went to work for De La Concha, and I told De La Concha, we have to change it. This is a bad match. It's, candies and cigars.
So he had like a candy store inside a cigar store.
Yeah, but it was a high-class candy store.
Okay.
And, all very fine chocolates.
Like chocolates from Switzerland or something?
No, not too much from Switzerland. Switzerland, Italy, and then the floor meal was manufactured in Brooklyn.
Okay.
So he said, "Lionel, I spent a lot of money for, all this equipment and all that." I said, "You'll make it back." He said, "Well, I don't want to know. You do it. You go ahead and do it." So I did. I got all the prices, and I had the thing converted, and from that, and when we reopened it up, it was 100% tobacco shop. And it started growing and growing. But in the meanwhile, they were building a spur on the subway to go to Long Island, up 6th Avenue, turn right on Central Park into Long Island. And the first couple of years, the first 2 or 3 years, it was tough. But when the subway opened up, and then business started increasing and started showing a profit. So the accountant told me, "Do you have a contract? Do you have a contract with Mr. De La Concha?" I said, "No, we shook hands on it." I said, "Lionel," he tells me, "Lionel, that's not when you do business. You have to have a contract." So to make a long story short, he was selling the business, and the potential buyers wanted to buy it, but they wanted me to sign a non-competing clause. And I said, "No, but if you want to, I'll buy the business from you." So that's what happened. I bought the business from him. And I got to go back to Herman Lane, because he told me, "Lionel, whatever you want, I'll give you, and you pay me whenever you can. Don't worry about it." So he, in that respect, I was very loyal to him, because other pipe manufacturers and tobacco blenders and all that he said, "You can get it much cheaper from us than from Herman Lane." I said, "Yeah, but he was there when I needed him. When he sells his business or he passes away, we can do business. But in the meanwhile, I strictly do business with Herman Lane in reference to pipe tobacco and pipes."
So loyalty was very important to you.
It was very, very important to me. To me, that's life. Somebody helps you when you need it, you don't forget. And unfortunately, in this life now, this present life, there's a lot of people that they have a short memory. A lot of people are very ungrateful.
Right. No, that's great that back then Herman Lane was able to help you out, to get you on your feet, to get you started in business. And so De La Concha, it opened like in 1964, and I think
I think it was 1962.
Oh, 62.
Yeah.
And when did you?
He bought it in 65.
65 or so.
Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, it was a long run. So you had mentioned back in, I guess back in that time, when you purchased it in that time period, I guess that was like in the mid 60s or so. They were building a subway system. A subway system right in front of the store.
Yeah. They started that sometime in 63, 64, which was very, very. It was very hard to get into business up, because you had no traffic. We had a wooden bridge in front of the store. the whole block from 53rd Street, and then it came up to the park, and we had a wooden bridge for about 3 years, and people didn't like walking on the plank, especially on. It wasn't a plank.
So it was like something on a pirate ship, like that walking the plank.
yeah, really.
If you fell, you were done.
Oh yeah, well there was a railing on the other side because there was a big trench, and at night they used to close the street up with these timbers, which were about 30 feet long and about a square foot, so to cover up the hole. So that went on for about 3 or 4 years until they completed it. And then once it opened up and the traffic, and then you can see the actual increase in business. It was awesome the way it started picking up. So at that time, every year we made a little profit, but it was growing every year. And
Right. So to tell us a little bit, so, that was the 60s, you got started in the 60s and then you went in through the 70s and 80s. Tell us a little bit about that journey from the 60s through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and into the 2000s in terms of how you perceived business, how was the business growing, and what really accelerated that growth, especially in Manhattan for a premium tobacconist such as yourself?
Well, I followed a lot in my father's footsteps. He was very honest, honorable, and with a lot of integrity. And when I got into the retail business, I wanted to sell the best and give the customer the best available product, and cigars, pipes, and so forth. And treated the customer like he was family. Make sure that you explain to him, since I had a lot of experience in cigars and pipe tobacco and all that. And to me, the cigar business is a love of a product, a love of something. You fall in love with it, because I always liked the cigar business. And you explain it. That's one thing that, you don't find too often. But in recent years, in the last 20 years, you get more and more retailers. I mean, legitimate tobacconist retailer. I'm not talking about the local grocery store, the candy store that they sell a million products. And if the customer had any problems, if he wasn't satisfied, he'll come over. He says, "Lionel, I don't like the cigar." I said, "Well, give me what you have left. I'll give you something else that you may like, and I guarantee everything you don't like." And very, very few people took advantage of that. They took advantage, but well, we just had one fellow, I remember. I'll never forget this. He came in. He was a middle-aged man, and he bought a box of 10 cigars, very expensive, on a Friday. He came back on a Monday, and he told one of my salesmen, he says, "I can't smoke these cigars. I'd like a refund." He said, "Okay." But then when he gave him the box was empty. So Kevin, one of my associates, he says, "Lionel, I got a problem out here. This customer wants his money back, but the box, is empty." So I went on. I said, "What seems to be the problem?" He says, "Yeah, I bought this on Friday, and I couldn't smoke them." So I told him, "If you couldn't smoke them, why did you smoke the whole box? It'd be no problem if you, smoke one or two. I'll give you a brand new box or anything else." But he says, "Well, if you don't give me my money back, I'm going to report you to American Express." I said, "Well,
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
So he left, and I never heard from American Express. But that's one of the rarest things, because most of the customers we had were loyal customers. I had, since I sold the store in 1907, in
2006.
2006. And I had very few situations like that. But the thing is, you gotta, in retail or any kind of business, whether you're selling cigars or whatever, you have to, number one is your customer. You gotta help your customers, you educate them. And that's a lot of the things that I have seen that in the last 25 years since cigars, especially since the cigar boom started in the early 1990, 91, it's grown tremendous. And one of the reasons for that is that Marvin Shanken, our business was growing. We were doing very, very well. Our business was growing on an average of 5, 7, 8% every year. I was satisfied with that. And I had a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the retail business with the customers and talking about it.
Right.
And then the cigar industry moved. It was moving well. But then when this magazine came out and the interviews and all that, it shut up like putting a jet engine on a train. I mean, it was unbelievable what was happening. And then people got enthused about it. And cigar dinners, we used to have cigar dinners at the Plaza, the Army and Navy Club and all that. And the amount of people that showed up was unbelievable.
Yeah, it was like, it kind of brought the cigars from old guys just like sitting around in front of their porch or something, smoking a cigar, and it was usually something that was horrible in terms of quality to right in the forefront. It just, everybody wanted to get on. The cigars were getting better and better, but there was a dark side to that period too, because during that cigar boom, as they call it, everybody started making cigars, and tobacco became, short in the supply chain, and people started, cutting corners. And then you had good cigars, and then all of a sudden you had really bad cigars, and there was a big shakeout at the end of the 90s, I believe.
That is correct. Let me go back. When the Cuban embargo came, there was Benjamin Menendez and Pepe Garcia. They owned the H. Upman brand, and they had a factory in the Canary Islands. So to them, the transition wasn't that bad. And they came out with a brand, Monte Cruz. They couldn't come out with and to import it into the United States, Monte Cristo. Well, Monte Cruz became the best number one seller in the United States on premium cigars. Now, we're talking about in the early 60s, 63, 64. But then it was bought by a big conglomerate. And they wanted to make their return on investment as soon as possible. And the labor in the Canary Islands was high, transportation of tobacco, because they used to use, many years before that, they used to use Canary tobacco from their own country, from the Canary Islands. But then they figured, well, it's much cheaper manufacturing in the Dominican Republic, and the tobacco is cheap. But they had no experience in that kind of range, and manufacturing so many cigars and of quality. So they moved the whole thing. They didn't do it on a gradual basis. They did it like really fast. And the number one cigar, Monte Cruz, he just dropped down like a lead weight. But it takes years and years. It isn't that just put a seed in the ground. It takes years of experience, time, and money. So after a while, they're training the cigar makers in the Dominican Republic, and cultivating it. They had chemists and expert in the ground,
the farming techniques.
The farming techniques, and they changed it and started getting better and better. And other countries in the Caribbean and Central America, like Nicaragua, Honduras, and Costa Rica, they started doing the same thing because there was such a big demand for quality cigars. So now, in my opinion, these countries make much better cigars on a consistent basis than the cigars coming out of Cuba today. Because before, the cigar business industry, whether it's in Cuba or Jamaica, there was a love of these manufacturers. They was in it. They wanted to make money, of course, like all businessmen.
There was a passion.
It's a passion.
Yeah.
It's a passion, and to make the best cigar they can make.
Agreed.
And it started growing, and more people got interested. And the more you educated then with the the cigar boom in the 90s, people started having dinners. The manufacturers were inviting key retailers from all over the country, down to the factories, showing them. And then when these retailers came back home, they were educated. And they can tell us what they learned, how it was growing tobacco. And they really were enthusiastic. So younger people were starting smoking cigars. And I'm not talking about a Tiparillo or these little cigars, regular size cigars, robust pyramids and all that. And they came back. And when they came back, I remember once we went to almost all the Central American countries and the Caribbean and all that. And you'd be surprised when these people came back. They were enthusiastic. They related their experience with their customers and all that, and they started, upgrading the customers because they knew they had a good product. They had people to stand by them, and that's why it was so difficult in the '90s to get cigars. Like my son was saying, everybody wanted to jump into the cigar business. And the biggest drawback, we placed an order, let's say, for 50 boxes, 100 boxes, and we got most of it, But during this period, I was getting 60, 70 boxes of super premium cigars. And during the period, I was getting 2 or 3 cigars. I don't want to mention any names, but I said, what I'm going to do with, 2 boxes or 3 boxes of these cigars every 3 months. He says, well, give it to, just sell 1 cigar at a time. I says, I can't do that. I have customers that buy, boxes. I can't say, well, here, you want. So what I did, like a retailer, if I couldn't get the merchandise, I bought it, other places that I can get.
Other outlets, yeah.
Outlets that I can get all the manufacturers. I won't display it because what's the use of displaying something you can't get? And then they said, well, let me have a box of this and that. I said, well, I can't. I don't have it. So what I did, I just took them off the showcase, and I had cigars from other manufacturers I can get because some manufacturers will not open. See, I don't mind if I have a retailer down the block and he's selling the same cigars. But if I'm getting one or 2 boxes a month and he's getting more, I can't compete with that. I don't have the cigars, so I put
right.
And there was manufacturers which will not open, and these were really gentlemen. They will not open new accounts until they had enough sufficient product to service the accounts. I didn't expect during the boom to get everything I wanted, but I expected a hell of a lot more than 2 or 3 boxes every 3 months.
Right. I mean, it's I think that was it was a turbulent time, I think, in the business. It was a time of prosperity, but also there was that other side where it was hard to get cigars and the quality. And then you had a lot of, like you said, these companies that just popped up that are no longer here because they were in it for the short term. They were in it for the quick money. They were in and they were out, and they didn't pay attention to the process. Cigars need to be fermented properly, aged properly. You need to have good farming techniques and good tobacco. We start with quality tobacco, and a lot of that went out the window during that time period. And as a result, there was a big shakeout of the industry. That probably back in the late '90s. But it did set the stage for brands that would come after that and the existing manufacturers to really up the bar, start to manufacture the best cigars possible. And today, I think we're living in the golden age of cigar making. I think today, the cigars coming out of Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, Honduras, Costa Rica are the best they've ever been. I mean, everybody's paying attention to the process, fermentating, and the cigars are just so much superior today than they've ever been. And so I think the consumer, the educated consumer, wins, at this stage because of that.
I agree with you 100%.
So yeah, this is great. I mean, to hear all these stories and to see how the family, went from growing tobacco in Cuba to learning how to manufacture cigars in Cuba and then coming to the United States. you're the first of the Melendis to get into the retail side of things, and that's where I cut my teeth. I worked. I've been in the cigar business almost 30 years now. Most of it in the retail side of things at De La Concha. And now I'm the first one to be out there as a cigar broker. I'm traveling like 7-8 states and representing different lines of tobacco. So it's been a process. It's been a journey, one that I'm very proud of. Just real quick, tell us a little bit about the early days. And it was kind of fascinating because at some point the premium cigar business needed to get a little bit organized, and they came out with an organization called, back then it was called the RTDA. And I know when you first started, the show was drastically different than it is today. If I remember correctly, you used to meet at some hotel in Midtown Manhattan and use like the rooms as there were no elaborate booths or anything like that.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. The first one I went to was in the Hotel Pennsylvania. They had it there every year. And they were like rooms and suites, and you go from one room and they show you their wares. But there was no explaining or cigar dinners or anything like that. Nothing like, like in the 60s. And people used to go from room to room and with shopping bags full of all kinds of stuff and all that. And there was really no love for it. There's a lot of discounters in the garment section and all that. And they were with the food on one side and people coming in. But there wasn't that love affair. It was just, give me this or give me that. And they were so busy with the fountain and other things that just used to come in, and the merchants didn't have time to explain to them. They didn't have this passion like a lot of retailers have today, and they have the time, and they spend time educating them, and that's why it made a big difference, bringing it back and as educated retailers and people. You got some very, very fine, retailers all over the country. And in Canada, then there was like my son mentioned, the Retail Tobacconists of America. But then they came out with an exclusive, an organization called the
TAA?
The TAA, Tobacconists Association of America. And they were like the cream of the crop, and they're very, very knowledgeable about cigars and all that. And they really promoted cigar smoking and all that. And they had the time. They had love for the cigars, and a lot of women, You had some women in the industry, retailers, top retailers. One of them became the president of the RTDA, Diana Gitz in Chicago, and then you have Linda Squire in California. And there's so many of them. And these women, they smoke cigars. Oh, by the way, during the cigar boom, you had a tremendous amount of women smoking cigars and going to the cigar dinners. And these women were not smoking little cigarillos. They were smoking regular Coronas, and there was a few of them smoking a Churchill. that looked kind of funny.
Well, Dad, this is great. Again, I want to thank you for the opportunity that you've given me to interview you. I think it's great to get these stories out, and I look forward to doing it again. You've been in business for a long time. You have a lot of knowledge, and I really appreciate all the opportunities that you've given me throughout my life so that I can be, where I am today. And again, thank you for being on the show. I mean, this is great, and I hope to be doing this again, with you real soon. So thank you very much.
Oh, yes. I'm looking forward to it also. But you also have your cigar business in your genes, because both your grandfathers were in the tobacco business. I was in the tobacco business. And your great-great-grandfather was a tobacco grower in Cuba, so you have it in your genes.
Yeah, that's true. You have to have a passion for it.
Oh, it's true, 100%. And I just want to mention, there's also during the boom, a lot of these gentlemen went into the business which had no knowledge of the cigar industry. And they set up factories. They became very successful. It's a passion of something that you really enjoy doing. And I really admire these fellows that really learn the business and manufacturing and really is on top of things. And not only that, but they educate people. And when you educate people, the retailer, he goes back and he tells his stories to his customers. And you'd be surprised. When we used to have cigar dinners, sometimes we had catered in the store. You'd be surprised the amount of people that used to come in. And people want this, they want that. And another thing, cigar smokers is like a fraternity. You can go someplace, you can be having a cigar dinner or in the store. There'd be a chairman of a board of Sheraton, who is Bud James and blue-collar workers sitting and discussing. They hand out cigars. They swear, let me try this cigar. Let me try it. It's
Right,
like
the
a
cigar.
fraternity.
Yeah, the cigar is like the great equalizer. It brings people together.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's definitely very, very true. And we've talked about that a lot in the past episodes on how, it doesn't matter if you're the CEO of a bank or the busboy of a diner. When you're in a cigar store, you're smoking cigars together. All of a sudden, the barriers break down, and some of these people become friends, and they actually do business together. So it's definitely a social business, something that is needed in today's world, especially with everyone being on their phones and on their computers. It's definitely a place to socialize, to meet people, to converse. And again, this has been the Purveyor Zone. My name is Ron Melendi. Thank you for listening to this fireside chat with my father, Lionel Melendi, great tobacconist. Thank you for everything that you've done in the industry, especially you and Grandpa. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
And we'll see you soon.
All righty.
All right,
You
Dad.
take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.